Hey there, everybody. Hopefully folks can hear me. Um, I'm going to make our introduction really short today because I am breaking all of the rules about connecting a panel like this. I have limited bandwidth, I have a spotty connection, and I do have my posse here. I've got Rick Jack, I've got Christina Rhylander, and I've got Jason Kattman. Together, we are a part of a chapter called Straight Talk for Government. That's the name we gave it. It is a chapter of the DevOps Institute, so we're affiliated with them. And our goal is to come together and provide whatever help that we can to the community in addressing the challenges we're facing when it comes to software engineering, modern software delivery, and DevOps in the government space. Today we have two very distinguished folks with us, John Foster from Fearless and Will Slack. I'm actually going to mute out, and Christina is going to help us through the intros here a little bit so I don't suck down the bandwidth. And with that, Will, do you mind introducing yourself a little bit more?
I'd be happy to. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Will Slack. I've been with the U.S. Digital Service since 2018, and before that worked at 18F and GSA, so two government tech shops, as it were. I worked in management, and I've done a big hiring project in USDS, so I've been deeply involved in the area of bringing technologists into government, the processes for assessment, the legal authorities, and I look forward to the conversation today. Christina, you're on mute.
My apologies. And John Foster?
Hello, everyone. My name is John Foster. I am the Chief Operating Officer of a company called Fearless. We are a digital services firm, roughly going on 14 years right now, about 200 folks strong. Really have this idea of building software with a soul, and this idea that we should be building software that really is pushing forward in support of the constituents of this country. I'm really excited about this conversation today because I think there are some lessons learned that I've personally experienced, Fearless has personally experienced in this realm. And for me in particular, I'm really interested in this idea and when it comes to the construct of diversity and equity. So you'll probably hear a lot of that from me in this conversation today.
Wonderful. And my name is Christina Rhylander. I come from 20 years of government experience and being a change agent within the acquisition community, mostly in software intensive programs. I have, over the last couple of years, left the GS service and come to MITRE to continue the good work and the good journey. And looking forward to talking about workforce. I think with all the modernization changes that are going on right now, it's really important that the people aspect isn't left behind. So Jason, I'll hand that over to you.
Sure. My name is Jason Kattman. I'm with the U.S. Digital Service. I've been here about a year. Previous to that, spent about 12 years as a federal civilian, 6 as a consultant, and about 7 as an Air Force officer, mostly focused on IT procurement and also some other mission-related things. And really, my passion is how do we actually get things done? Obviously, people are the most important part, but a lot of times that signal is lost a little bit amongst the noise of the bureaucracy and especially contracts, and how do we actually get the structures in place for people to accomplish the mission for, in this case, the government. And we throw up so many different barriers to actually getting down to what's important. I'd like to talk and understand some more things about how we actually make change and achieve things amongst the fray. And Rick, I'll pass it to you.
Hello, folks. Hi, my name is Rick Jack. I am the senior scientist for software engineering. I work at NAVWAR, or Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific, where my role is to try to drive digital transformation and innovation across the Navy with respect to software engineering, which has been a journey for most of the Department of Defense and specifically for the Navy. So I recognize that talent is the key component of our transformation. So So this conversation is dear to us because it has been an aspect of the efforts that tends to be a back burner topic. And I appreciate the team bringing forward this topic, because across the Department of Defense, talent and our ability to maintain, retain, hire, and manage efforts has been a critical aspect of this, and probably something that needs the light shown up on it. So thanks so much for this topic.
Thank you. And I'm Trac Bannon. Hopefully I'm not too choppy. I am a software architect and an engineer. I work with the MITRE Corporation. I also spend a lot of time with Christina as a digital change agent, and that's led me to be introduced to all these people. At the end of the day, why does an engineer care about all of this human stuff? Because like Jason said, like Will said, like John said, we like to get stuff done. And with that, we'll kick off with the first question. And then again, Christine, I'll ask you to do a little bit more leadership on this. Really, we're all saying that we're having a hard time finding the right people. Are we looking in the place? Someone said there's not enough good people. I'm not sure about that. So I'll kick that over to you, Will, and let Christina follow that up.
I think there's a both and situation here. It is true that many agencies have gotten used to recruiting in a certain way and are maybe not used to some of the ways that recruiting works in terms of best practice today. Oftentimes that's because agencies don't have resources necessarily to recruit in the way that private sector companies do. So there's kind of a huge budget mismatch here that makes it hard to do that recruiting. But it's also true that there's huge populations out there that you just need to know how to reach. One of the big things that we suggest and advocate is to work with the people in those agencies, the subject matter experts who are already doing that work, and finding out what communities they're a part of. And then going a step beyond that, what communities are those folks a part of, with a special eye toward making sure that job announcements are pushed out as far as possible. Don't rely on the fact that a USA Jobs posting is public and say, we've put it to the public. That's not enough. What listservs, what networks, what professional groups, what different kind of affinity groups can you push these messages to? And then the second thing that we can really do is make sure that applicants are prepared with the information they need to be able to successfully make it through the process. Many federal applicants don't know the federal hiring process. They're not familiar with it. It can feel very strange. So if we give people the information so they're empowered and they know how to apply successfully, they're not going to feel like the federal hiring process is a black hole, as it's sometimes described. But those are policy decisions that agencies can make to make it so that that talent has better access to the roles and doesn't feel like they need to know someone on the inside to have a chance.
Most definitely will. And I tend to also say, and Jason got to hear me say this earlier to him, that we're never going to just fire everybody in the government and get all new talent. That's never going to happen. Truthfully, the answer to a lot of our problems are right in front of our face. There are our very own people that exist today. And I guess, much to what Rick Jack was saying earlier, what are we doing to invest in them? What unique ways and approaches are we putting in place that show them that they matter, and take them through those next steps in that really hard journey? And so, John, I'd like to kind of get your take on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, we're probably going to bounce around to a couple of different constructs because I think they all, intertwine here, right? But to kind of piggyback a little bit of what you just said, Christina, right? Like what I don't see happen often in government, and I'm going to use the big G, right? That includes industry and government alike, is this idea of aligning whys in people, like the why of a person, right? And when you align mission outcomes, right, to a person's why, I think you get to the best outcomes. That's what we try to do here at Fearless, right? And so a little bit to your point, Christina, I don't see a lot of times, one, fundamentally like an understanding from a procurement or delivery perspective, what are we trying to get at, right? What are we trying to get to? And then ultimately, what skill, like let's name the skill that's required to develop the people to get to those outcomes. So once again, if you align the whys up and down, I think you get to greater outcomes. And I think that requires a lot of intentionality that sometimes government and industry don't have the opportunity to spend time, cultivate, mature. So I think that's ultimately like a big gap for me.
I would agree there, John. There was Dr. Jeff Bowling, who was one of the senior advisors when Ms. Lord was in her role. He I don't know if he still does, but he used to teach at the Air Force Academy. And one of the things that he would go in and say is preparing them for their acquisition career field. You are going into a program not of your choosing, with a budget not of your choosing, with a team absolutely not of your choosing. All of the components that are going to exist, you didn't choose it, but you're going to have to make it work. And you're going to have to run a successful program and meet those mission outcomes. And so, to your point, right? Where is that intentionality? Where do we align the whys for the best success, not just for the teams collaborating, working on the program, but for us being able to achieve the mission or the business outcome that the DoD desires, right, and requires. Rick and Jason, I'd love to kind of get some of your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, that is what, for the Department of Defense, typically folks are hired into a position that's specific to a job, a title. And so what you mentioned there is those nuances that you carry along with respect to the ability to execute your job. So you kind of come in with a little bit of baggage with respect to the responsibilities. But that being said, there's a lot of ability to figure out how we're going to get our folks upskilled, I guess is the rest, in terms of the talent, and how do we make sure that the folks understand that there's more to it than what you get hired to do, right? I remember one time I was interviewing for a job, and we were talking to some senior folks, and it's not that you're not hired for what you did, you're hired for what you want to we expect of you. And so doing that and making sure people understand that when they come into a role, that there's potential and opportunity to invest in themselves is a key aspect to that.
All right, Jason, do you have any thoughts that you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's something about from like a procurement perspective, it's almost like an anti-pattern. One thing I like to do is actually take the focus off of individual people in contracts and instead let the firms manage their workforce as they need to in order to accomplish things. And really comes down to like, let's give the opportunity to the vendor to produce the outcomes of the people they think are best, versus trying to prescribe who we think is the best for them to then do. It's a bit of controlling outputs versus controlling inputs. And I think there's a level of abstraction. You can actually really have great outcomes, not just in mission outcomes, but in hiring outcomes, when you give vendors the freedom to abstract a capability away from a person, where it is more like what Rick was saying is, we're hiring you to do something and we have faith that you can do it. Let's not judge your ability to do a good job solely based on education, certification, experience, etc. Requirements. In fact, I mean, risk of blowing up the structure here. I mean, John, I think you could probably really appreciate that from a diversity perspective. I think the education, experience, certification stuff, that's pretty up high on Maslow's hierarchy to get done. So I don't think there's a direct correlation between a person with their butt with a certification in a seat is therefore going to guarantee success.
Right. And that leads us to the two different spectrums here, right? You've got I'm hiring government or military, how they get placed, in addition to how we procure our capability to execute the many programs that we have across the DoD as well. So with that, I will ask you guys, when we are in the hiring mode, right? And we'll say, I'll step outside of acquisitions for a moment here and just say, do we feel we're looking for the right things when we put out those job announcements that I think we all know are a little bit canned? So I'm kind of leading the witness slightly here. But Rick, I think I'll start with you on this one.
That actually is the fundamental problem. I think most, like, as the job advertisements I've written and putting out, it's very difficult to do what I call predictive management of the talent you expect to achieve. So the strategy tends to be, well, I can't get too specific, so I'll genericize it. I'll genericize my advertisements and just put generic skills in there or credentials or criteria, which then casts a fairly wide net. And then outside the hiring management process tends to be a challenge, right? We'll get somebody who comes in that maybe is not what you expected, but still meets the criteria of what was asked for. So that in the Department of Defense has been something that I think the DoD needs to look into in terms of how we go. We obviously have things like USA Jobs, which is a great segue into getting a talent pool, but we still have to start opening the aperture and looking at different ways, maybe even direct hiring authorities, those kinds of things. There has to be some other avenues where we can expand our ability to characterize what we need in our workforce. Yeah,
and I think one of the things from a hiring manager point of view, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but I tend to see, we have all of the abilities, right? I think it's up for debate, right, all across the DoD. Do I need a new occupational series because of software? A lot of those authorities exist for us to take, for example, an IT specialist, give it a different job title, still use the 2210 series, and then be able to modify the announcement to meet the specific need that we have to get the right talent for that role. Maybe not quite, but getting us a little closer to what John was getting at earlier, which is potentially aligning the whys, but also the skills and capabilities. I think it'd be really awesome. Let's go from I'll say somebody who is in the government hiring folks to John Foster on the commercial side. What are some of your thoughts around this? I know that you guys take a different approach to hiring. What are some ways that you think these, I'm not asking you to be an OPM SME, but what are some ways that you think that this could be adapted within the government?
Yeah, I think Rick was probably heading down the path that I would go, which is, this is straight talk, so we'll talk straight, right? Like, can someone on this call, if you have the authority, please remove educational requirements from job recs, at least on the contractual side. I think it serves no point at all, first and foremost. And secondly, here at Fearless, like, we talk about trying to create this world, right, where everybody is a contributor, where everybody feels meaning and purpose. And sometimes I think some of these educational requirements create disenfranchisement of certain individuals, certain classes of people, right? And I don't think it's an intentional thing at all times, but it is the truth of where we are today, right? So there are pools of talents of people who I think it was Jamie Thomas. First of all, shout out to Jamie Thomas in the comments. Like, she's blowing them up, and I love it because I think a lot of what she's saying is fundamentally true, right? But if we're going to get to people who have like really deep passion, right, for what they want to do in life, we have to lower the barrier of entry for them to actually be a part of these important mission sets, right? So we have we have to work on that. And I think maybe the first step would be just like, let's just drop the educational requirements. That's one explicit ask I would have.
John, let me put one PSA in here for you. FAR Part 39, 104 talks about saying the contracting officer for IT contracts must justify in writing why they're asking for experience or educational requirements. They have to literally say it cannot be met without this requirement, and it also means you're not using performance-based contracting. So like that tool is there for any of you engineers out there who are beating your heads on not being able to implement what John is saying based on the structure of whatever template they probably got, in the past. So anyways, PSA, John, sorry to interrupt you there.
John, I actually have a question for you on that front, right? So when you're in those situations, do you find that you've got the top qualified person who would fit best for whatever scenario is you want a contract for, but because of the limiting factors that get placed in the contract, that you may not end up with the right skilled person, but the right person that meets the education requirements? I know it's a little bit of a tricky question, but I'm kind of curious, like, do you guys run into those types of issues as you're filling those roles?
Yeah, it happens, frankly, all the time. And I'll probably answer it from both ways, right? So when we come across people who maybe don't have all of the skills, right? Like we at Fearless, and I'm speaking for the industry here too, right? Like we accept good companies accept the burden and understanding of how do you increase the capacity, right? To make that person be effective for whatever role that the government is asking of them. And let's just be, once again, straight talk, right? Like that cost comes at our expense. We don't ask the government to cover that at all. So that's another pain point that I have in this whole ecosystem. And then also we come across people who maybe have the right skill sets, but honestly maybe just don't have the right level of passion, right? Or maybe their whys don't align. So we have to go find other places for them to be effective. So it's a constant juggle. It is a very tactile sport, to be honest.
All right, and Will, let's kind of jump back into the government hiring side of it with you here. When we pose the question, are we looking for the right things? I know you've done an extensive amount of work on this that I know I highly respect. I love it. Talk to me a little bit about that. What you guys found and what you discovered and kind of designed a new pathway forward through.
Yeah, there are quite a few different elements here. One is that in some instances, agencies don't understand the flexibilities already available to them. So we hear about direct hire sometimes as discussed as this tool that it's discussed in a way as if it solves all the problems. Direct hire removes two specific elements of hiring, but mentally it feels a lot more free than it actually is. So I think we need to have the mindset we have about direct hire and think about that. In standard competitive hiring, you can get all the results that you want out of standard competitive hiring. On the point of education, it's definitely the case right now that agencies, maybe because they have a hard time assessing who is qualified and who isn't qualified, well, education becomes a proxy for that. But there are ways to be qualified that don't necessarily go through education. And that requires agencies to have a better process for determining, well, who has the qualifications, who doesn't. And that takes time and it takes assessment work. And agencies have to be able to prepare to kind of bring that and do that instead of kind of looking at education as a proxy. That especially applies in technology, where a lot of our educational policies, for very good reasons, say you need to have an accredited institution. But you can gain tech skills in any number of ways and trainings, and those don't necessarily follow the same thing. Just a few other notes on earlier points as well. The point about PDs being more general, you can absolutely have a more general position description and a more specific job announcement. And agencies sometimes think, oh, wait, I have to mirror the exact text. No, the job announcement can be more specific than a PD and go into those specific skills that you need. Agencies also might think, well, there are these qualification standards that we have, for example, for the 2210 IT specialist, but those can be made more specific as well.
Yes.
So your job announcement doesn't have to say, we will assess your attention to detail. You can look at detail in the context of a more specific skill set, especially when working at more specialized jobs. The last little note I would make about agencies is that you don't have to title your 2210 positions IT specialist. You can use a working title in USA Jobs that's mentioned on the PD. That doesn't have to be the official title that resonates with the audience you want. So you can post a job that says, this is a DevSecOps expert. This is a product manager. These are terms that are possible if they're backed up by the job analysis you've done. I know there's a lot of commentary, but happy to talk more about any of those details.
Can I ask a question? Just because I'm learning, right? I think we all got to be continual learners, right? So Will, like when you say agencies, can you drill down and say like, you know, kind of the personas or even like the roles within those agencies that have that control to make some of the changes that you just mentioned?
Everything I just mentioned is part of Title V hiring, which is the standard competitive hiring, also called delegated examining or DE hiring. That is a process available for most agencies. Some agencies do things like accepted service hiring. Across the DoD, there's a lot of direct hiring that's also happening. So a lot of things I discussed can also be applied in those environments, but I'm talking about what's usually thought of as the hardest or most restrictive form of hiring. You can work technologists through that process totally successfully. It usually just involves getting your hiring managers and your HR experts in a room together to talk about what's needed in this job and not treating job analysis as something that you can do in a 30-minute meeting and not something you can do by sending emails back and forth. When you get people together in a room, what we've seen is sometimes HR will go, oh, I didn't realize that this skill set was so important. And the hiring manager will say, yes, you keep sending me people that don't have this skill set, but they didn't necessarily get together. So that it's taking the time to do that job analysis. And then something you can do to make that work happen more efficiently is to group like positions together and do hirings of cohorts. So if you're going to go through an effort of qualifying, going through and checking the qualifications of many candidates, we'll try to do that where you can hire 5 people off of that list across your agency, or use some of the flexibilities in law to hire into other agencies. If agencies have extra people, they can share them with each other. That helps make this more time-consuming qualification work more effective, in line with Executive Order 13932.
I love it. That is all great information, and the premise of the largest takeaway, right? All the authorities actually exist to do these things. So do we need new series, or do we need to adapt our thinking? And which one, right? In some cases, it could go either way. Maybe I do need a new series for a specific reason. But in most cases, the opportunities and the policies all enable us to actually begin making some of these shifts. Once we're able to take that step, I think we then use that data to determine whether or not that new series is actually necessary and needed or required. So I want to pose another question to the group here. Do you think that it is most necessary for us to hire and then train? Do you think that we need to build the talent that we need, or is it some of both? And I want to kind of get everyone's, the group's thoughts here. And in this case, John, I'll start with you to kind of get an understanding from you around where should we be putting that focus, one or the other or both?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is an and, right? Life is always an and, never an or. I'll speak about one aspect and I'll let others talk about their perspective. But I highly believe that there is enough talent out in the world, right? We just have to be way more intentional about reaching out to them. Brief example, we actually had a large employer within Baltimore. We're located in Baltimore. We had a meeting just yesterday with them, and they're trying to create an apprenticeship program. And we brought in 6 or 7, highly competent junior folks, right, who demonstrated that they have a little bit of depth in some of their skills, but as far as like what we call T-shaped individuals, like their breadth or people skills, right, like massive empathy, right, massive understanding of how to communicate with people. And when we brought them in front of this large employer, like, oh my gosh, this is great. Like, yes, this is the talent that we need. So it definitely is out there. It's just, we just have to be intentional about creating the conditions for those folks to be able to be injected into, some of these pipelines, some of these hiring processes. So it's one thought.
All right, Jason, what are your thoughts on that?
So one of the things I've been kind of tooling around as far as phrasing lately is beginning with the end in mind. So much is reactionary. I need this person with this skill right now. And actually, we've been discussing this within the acquisition workforce is how do we plan for 5 years to have the right people there, understanding that it might not be that person? How do we seed enough basic of a cohort to then grow up knowing that some will leave and some will go on to bigger, better things or whatever else. And how do you get them on the skill train versus I need to hire the right person right now? And unfortunately, you have a lot of baggage when that comes into it. We all do. It's the mental model, right? I'm coming in with this experience and everything is going to be in this lens. And I think growing people and really growing the organization with that end in mind of, and especially investing in the people who are just growing their experience, who could actually gain a lot of like programmatic background as they think about and learn about IT and maybe some modern processes and how it applies to that program versus taking one of my favorite foils is the DoD or the Federal Civilian FAC PM Level 3. And I'll say something controversial. There's so much garbage knowledge in there that doesn't apply to most situations that then get misapplied because, we're not building F-35s over in my world. But that's the construct that they've been trained from. Christina, you might actually resemble that one, but I'm not sure. But anyways, but it's how do we grow people in the right environments to solve the right problems so we are there in 5 years?
Yeah.
Not just knee jerk, put the person in a bad situation, then they leave in one, because we never quite got that primordial ooze correct to foster, intelligent life forms.
Completely agree there, Jason. Context matters, right? It's important to understand if we're asking a bunch of acquisition folks who are running multi-million, sometimes billion-dollar software-intensive programs that may not resemble the type of training that they have received for years and years, or it's been years since they even went through that training, right? Once you're trained, all you're doing is keeping it up to date. Hopefully you're keeping it up to date. So Rick, I'd like to kind of talk to you a little bit about that and how that is sort of operating and going for you in the Navy.
Yeah, so I think actually the Defense Innovation Board just came out with a study that kind of highlights this exact problem that we're all alluding to. And I love the way John phrased it, which was it's an and problem, right? So if you only hire and forget that there's an other aspect to the growth of a person, you're gonna get hit up against something that's going to be a retention issue. So investing in the people side of the equation has to be part of our equation. So the question is how do we invest appropriately in the skills that are required to upskill those folks? Because obviously if we look at major programs like the F-35 or something like that, there's a very distinct set of skills required to do program management. But what about the other skills, like IT-related skills? I remember having a conversation about 2 years ago about what a data scientist really is. Is it a mathematician? Is it a computer scientist? So we have to think that investment in the skills in somebody is part of the retention process, right? Like, hey, I can give you the opportunity to come work for us, and you can go get a degree. You can go get higher level education if you want to. I'll invest in your soft skills. How about communication? I'll send you to classes on learning how to communicate better and emotional intelligence. those kinds of investment strategies have to be part of the equation as we go down this path.
I like what you said there. I think a lot of those aspects of the things that we can offer up to them, right? Those are some of those who they are, what make them up, and why they want to be somewhere, because those things are offered. They align with the mission or the business, whatever it may be. And so I think that's a really good point. Will, I'm kind of curious from you, kind of your answer to that, but overall also asking, when you kind of get into those, the things you can offer up to candidates in the government hiring process, what have you seen as options or areas of need that we need to continue pursuing?
I think that for people that are in the federal space already, a lot of the federal hiring process is not a surprise for us. We know these elements. We may be involved on the other side of it as hiring managers. But for anyone that doesn't have that existing connection, who is trying to make sense of those postings, it can be really challenging. What's a DD-214? What are these other kind of forms? Do I need to submit it? Do I not need to submit it? So there's a role to think about the tooling here, but also when agencies are working on their postings and their job postings, being applicant-centered in the language so that it works for applicants is an important part of the conversation, and gathering feedback and say, did this announcement make sense for you? I think sometimes because we're all in the federal space, we know how this system works, and we don't think about it. What is it like if you've seen this thing for the first time, or if you want to join the government, didn't have a chance to? You're not going to know necessarily what the FAR is, for example, when thinking about what it is. So how we define things. I also think on the point of new people in training, agencies oftentimes, I think, have an incentive to hire someone that already has all the necessary experience to operate as an expert. Because as the government loses people with those expertise, you want to sub people back in. We end up with a little bit of a tragedy of the commons where there's not enough hiring of talent and then building them up and then training them up. And that's a little bit because every agency's individual incentive is to get the talent that they need. No agency has an incentive to train up people and then possibly lose them, jumping up to another agency. So if we can get agencies to work together to bring in, not junior, but more less experienced talent so that those folks can be trained up, we'll be in a much better spot. The final thing I want to note about equity, to John's point, is that when you're thinking about the hiring that you're doing and the cost of living of the cities that you're in, and if you're asking people to work in person in those cities, you are making an equity choice. You may not think that you're making an equity choice, but you are doing that when you say, this job pays this much in a city that pays this much, and I need you to live here, when the cost of a home is something. So in thinking about what positions need to be and where they need to be, can they be done from a field office? Can they be done from other locations? That's part of the equity conversation as well, so that people are able to join and able to gain those skills who want to serve and want to join government and just haven't had that avenue yet.
Yeah, I'll add a note, and then I'd like to give John a chance to respond to that. I'll come from a military spouse point of view. When a lot of things are required to be in a certain location, if someone has the skill, the talent, the capability, all the requisite needs, but yet they don't live in that one specific place, nor can they because they're a military spouse required to be in another location, there becomes issues there as well. And I know, I speak for myself and probably many other military spouses that have run into this situation before. But John, I want to also kind of hand it over to you to kind of talk through a little bit about what Will was mentioning, and then we'll move on to the next question.
No, I think Will hit that aspect of equity right on the head. So I don't think we need to pound that one anymore. But I want to go back to something that Rick said, because I think it's an important other aspect that's kind of missed when we talk about equity and we're talking about building people, right? Not everybody needs the same thing in their growth, right? And this is a fallacy that I think happens within the government, is that we misapply the construct of equality and equity. Equity is getting people the things that they need, like individually at the right time that they need it, right? Equality is applying the same construct to everybody. And so when we talk about, the ideas of building capacities in individuals, I think, it's incumbent upon the government and industry to figure out how do I help person A over here get what they need? And that support construct may be completely different than, person B over here. And I think, it's a hard thing to do at scale. And I think that's the reason why the government tends to fail in this regards. But I just want to make sure that we, clear up the idea of equity versus equality and how it's applied in growing people.
Yeah, well stated there. And I want to pose a question here around how, right, within bringing it back around to technology and DevOps, and I'm going to open this up to anyone who wants to answer it. But when we talk about how you scale that knowledge, right? Because right now we have, from what I've seen, we have a lot of great people who are departing the government space. Sometimes they're doing it because of reasons of wanting to help from outside. Sometimes they're doing it because they feel like they're fighting the battle alone. What are ways that we can begin to bring more people along on the journey and really scale that knowledge out? Pardon the doorbell. I'll throw it out to anybody.
Yeah, let me add to that context, because I'd love to hear what John and Will have to say. So I'll give an anecdote from the Navy side that maybe help expand the aperture of that question. So we know that there's this mass amount of turnover. We're going to be pragmatic in our situation now. Technology is advancing at a lot higher pace. Skill sets are at very high demand. Anecdotally, I could tell you that one of my efforts, we for the Navy, we tend to outsource a portion of our workforce. For example, we contract for certain expertise. And even at the contractual level, holding on to talent has been crazy. I had 80% turnover on one of my efforts relative to the skills. And that was interesting to me. So during one of our trade shows, I was talking to one of my vendors, and he said, "It's an absolute dumpster fire out there, Rick. It's a dumpster fire." And that's because the fluidity of the workforce that's occurring now, even between vendors, they're poaching each other's talent. And so when we take that structure and apply it to our hired work, our contracted workforce, and our local workforce, this idea of loyalty tends to be a lot more of a different definition in today's world than what it was, say, 5 years ago. So what do you guys think in terms of how one deals with that workforce that's in such a volatile situation right now?
John, you want to go first? I think I can speak more from the within government side, and I think it's challenging, and it's challenging when the nature of maybe the professional career track and what is a norm in industry is maybe separating a little bit from what is a norm in government, and those what a worker needs or what someone needs to be doing the job is different when they're in different stages of their life. And so just because you've solved it for being able to hire in folks maybe who are coming more out of school is different than solving for people that are maybe raising their families, is different than solving from different groups. And so there's different personas here, and you have to think about each one of those groups in who you're serving, and think about what is the set of things that I can offer them, so that you're not creating a situation where the incentives are you're creating a situation where people are kind of penalized for their passion, or we create an equity implication, which is a risk of today.
All right, so I think that there were a couple of questions in the chat that I know our group was sort of eyeing to kind of talk about. So I'm going to open the floor to either John or Will, whichever one of you guys want to jump in and talk through those.
Was there one question in particular, Will, you wanted to address?
I can take them both. So if you want to, you want to go first, or do you want to?
You got it. Whichever one you want to go first.
So Mike asked about the role of data in driving changes to the hiring practice, and I think looking at your baseline stats is the most important thing that I can suggest. If your baseline stats and those baseline metrics will tell you a lot about what problem you're having. Are you having a recruitment problem where the people that you aren't applying in the first place? Are you having an issue where the people you want are applying, but they're not making it through the process, maybe because they're not sure what to write on the resume, or they're not, or maybe, or is your job announcement written in such a way that you're attracting the wrong people? Or are you having people apply, and then because your qualifications and assessment process isn't quite working, you end up with a certificate that has a lot of people that maybe aren't equipped to do the job? Those are three really different problems. And I think your metrics can tell you about who's applying, who's being qualified, and who's being referred. And then in situations when someone doesn't accept an offer, that's data. If your agency wants someone and they say no, that's the most important data you can have about here's something that we can do to get better people. Because if someone is saying no to that offer, there's probably a lot of other people that aren't even applying for the same reason that you want to look at. And the best way to create alignment to David's question, I think, is just to have an accountable owner and say, this hiring manager is going to take it upon themselves to really work with HR and dig in and be available to HR and not treat hiring as HR's problem. At many companies, talent is everyone's problem. Executives, line staff spend a lot of time interviewing and talking to people. That is not the norm in the same way inside government. So there's a little bit of a norm shift that needs to happen in making your time as a hiring manager available so that you're prioritizing not just the team you have today, but the team you want in the future. John, what else would you add?
I think a little bit to Mike's question. I agree, like data should drive decisions, right? But I think it's important to first kind of define like what's the goal and what's the objective, right? And sometimes like I think that government tends to not want to do that for maybe incentive reasons, or maybe just unintentional, right? But not explicitly stating, here is the thing that we're driving towards, right? And then letting the data dictate whether or not like you're making, progress towards those goals, right? Is something that I see quite often. And honestly speaking, it's something that we're trying to even address internally at Fearless. We're talking about, all the things you just mentioned, Will, in your hiring process and some of that data, right? Or we're talking about, what does diversity look like, or what does equity, or why do people fall out of our pipelines, right? Like we had to take a step back and say, okay, like, well, what are we driving towards? Like, why are we doing this? Like, what world are we trying to create? And I think by taking that full step back, we're saying, okay, like, well, crap, we're not good at this, or crap, like we need to spend more time understanding, this system process that maybe is causing pain for us, right? And so I think just taking a step back and looking at goals, I think is a good first step.
Yeah, John, I want to expound on that. I feel like the government's trying to drive places by instruments. The speedometer and a tachometer in your car are not going to get you where you need to be. It's so few people know that you can install a new gauge into your dashboard to actually understand what you're doing. I will say this as a procurement person and a keeper of the keys on all things weird, bureaucracy, opaque. I feel the same way about the hiring process. And when I've met people who really know how to use the hiring process, it's amazing. But I feel like 99% of people don't understand that. And I'll second Will on that whole, and this is maybe like therapy here, right? Like I get dumped on projects on me saying, make sure my program's successful by doing an awesome contract. And I'm going, yeah, this is still your thing, buddy. But they're onto something else. And I feel like the hiring thing is the same boat. It's such a pain in the butt to get anything through HR often. You just kind of like knee jerk, get your thing, hope it works out well. And you're almost afraid to change things because some government bean counter is going to look at it and go, well, this doesn't fit the position classification per the 1984 spec. So therefore you're back to the drawing board versus pushing something that will get through. And then you can let, caution to the wind and maybe the right person applies. Maybe I'm exaggerating things over there, maybe on purpose a little bit, but I feel very much that people don't understand it. They don't understand what's possible. And they are just hoping that they can get something done versus the right thing. I don't know. Is that what Rick, I feel like Navy probably has more people thinking about this kind of thing, but I see that problem at places I've been and where I've helped out.
Yeah, I would second that. Yeah, it's an observation we all have with respect to that. So You know, the landscape of what we're talking about is extremely broad here. It's not just the hiring thing. It's the growth of folks and the retention aspects, and you have to look at the entire landscape of where you want to go, and doing like workforce planning and estimation and understanding what you're intending on doing in the future is something that lacks a lot of foresight. So we have to rethink our strategies for how we're measuring those things, and ultimately understand that the journey is going to be bumpy. Not only are you trying to hire a workforce or gain folks or establish an effort, but you have to be prepared for the inevitable turnover. Like, for example, our strategies have to take into consideration that you may lose folks along the way. So it's not just the investment in folks; it's the idea that you have to have more quivers in your more arrows in your quiver. Because if you put all your eggs in one basket and your workforce is super fluid, you're gonna have challenges with respect to maintaining the performance that you expect or the product you expect to deliver. And I'd be curious what John and Will, like, if you've experienced those things, are there mechanisms that you can do to help with those aspects?
John, you want to go first? There's not a magic answer. That I think if you create in leadership a demand for information, and you say, we really want to learn and know what's not working here, and you think in an applicant-centered way on what those problems are, you'll find out a lot more. Like, it's not, people that don't get a job don't usually, or turn down a job, are not used to saying, here's why. They don't want to, that can feel like burning a bridge or something like that. So you have to be expressly open to that type of information. And I think when leaders say, no, improving on this and better understanding this is something that's important to me, that helps counter some of those institutional incentives that go more toward the siloing effect, where you don't find that out necessarily.
So being able to give and receive feedback, right? That feedback, the feedback loop applies to HR, it applies to software, it applies to the programs, it applies to everything that we do. And John, I'll pause there so you can add on.
Yeah, I think at Fearless, what we have to do, and sometimes when government allows us to, like we're doing it with y'all, we have to continuously help people understand. Like, once again, I go to the whys. You'll hear me say why a lot, right? Like not just like your personal why, but like what's the mission outcome, right? Quick anecdotal story. I had the opportunity to speak, some years back with the senior acquisition executive at an Intel agency, and she talked about like what you call the red blob. And the red blob is essentially individuals who joined the intelligence community right after 9/11. And there was a huge spike in applicants at that time. And the red blob is essentially that mass of people moving through the years up until they retire out, right? And she was worried about what happens when these individuals retire out, because there's a lot of domain knowledge that was going to go away. It is going away, frankly speaking, because of that. And so maybe a little bit to your point, Rick, like there's something different about this workforce today that we have to tie in and tap into their whys. There was a why after 9/11, and I think we all got behind it, right? There's a new set of whys I don't think that we've articulated enough to individuals. And I think it's a little bit to what Jamie said around, like, maybe the why is around, technology advancement, right? Like, we're in this knowledge economy. Everybody wants to understand how to do things more efficiently, effectively. Maybe that's one thing that we have to tap into. But if we don't spend the time naming the whys and having those conversations on a continual basis, like, hey, we're developing this thing because it's helping this end user. We're doing this thing because it's in support of this mission set, right? If we don't tie it in for people on a continual basis, once again, a tactile way, I think we're going to continue to lose people, at great clips. So
I'm going to add something too. From an organizational perspective, I also think we need to be asking the why not, because so much stuff is taken for granted of why you can't do something. And I think we absolutely have to question why are we continue this pattern that we know is not working? And do we fully understand what is actually the crux of the issue? And again, I think it comes down to some of that opaque stuff. And I could probably set up another hour of talking about risk, right? I mean, I think so many people, especially in government, are so afraid to move in any direction. I mean, for instance, can we give a candidate accurate feedback of why they didn't get a job? What's a lawsuit? I mean, who knows? So there's all kinds of things that people don't feel comfortable with. It's like I'll give you a reference and let you know the dates that you worked, here, and that's it. And that is not helpful for anybody, but it's a cover your butt strategy. And whether it's valid or not, who knows, right? I think we've stopped asking a lot of these questions of our organizations of why we can't do better. But I don't know, that's maybe just opposing. So I guess from here we could do a wrap. Let's start. We're going to go with this. We'll go Rick, Christina, Will, and John. And maybe we can just do a quick 1-minute synopsis or stump or whatever you want to do to either get people's heads scratching or make a point. So Rick, do you want to start with a wrap up?
Yeah, just one final point that, I'll speak specifically from a DoD civilian perspective, that I think somebody touched upon it just slightly, and I'd like to maybe foot stomp or end on this, is like, everybody knows that in the Department of Defense, the pay scales or the competition with respect to incentivization is a little different. But I think, there's an aspect that we can't forget about, that pay isn't the only equation that keeps us around. For me, I just want to make sure it's clear that it's a sense of purpose, my sense of duty and delivering what we do, that really keeps me invigorated in what we do. And I know that the department invests in that. And so we should explore those aspects as well. It's not always about, incentivization on a monetary scale that gets us around. So that's one point I want to make sure it's clear that from the department's perspective, that I do appreciate what the value that and the purpose that we provide as a community over.
Christina?
I'm going to play off of what David Freed just said a minute ago. Let's experiment more, right? Why not? I'll say we talked a lot today about the policies exist for us to do the things that we actually desire doing. So what is stopping us, right? Is it our mindset? If we're uncomfortable, that's fine. Let's do exactly what David stated here. Let's begin experimenting. Let's try it with 10 different job announcements and see what happens. And then let's begin to scale that. Let's iterate on what works and be willing to take the moments that John said earlier, the, oh crap, we're not good at this moment, or oh crap, that went wrong. And let's pivot from that. So I'll stop there, and why not experiment, and hand it back to you, Jason.
Sure, I'm going to pass it on to Will.
In my work in the government, I feel like there's 4 big reasons why it can be hard to deliver technology, none of which are technology. It's hiring, it's compliance, it's procurement, it's budgeting. And I have climbed compliance mountain, and I feel like I've done pretty well on hiring mountain now. I will leave procurement mountain to all of you. But I think both hiring and procurement mountain have something in common, in that people treat them as very scary. They want to stay totally away from them. They're like, you're the procurement person, just go and make all the right things happen. And in reality, a little bit of knowledge goes a long way to making someone a more productive partner to a procurement professional. In the same way in hiring, a little bit of knowledge goes a long way. You don't need to treat hiring as this black box that's going to eat you. It's not. The rules are pretty straightforward. And some of the changes in the government space, so that we're fair to every applicant and everyone has equal consideration, those are great values that we should have, absolutely. And that little bit of knowledge will mean you're a much more productive partner to your HR professionals, instead of just offloading all the risk to them, because that doesn't work in either, I think, the procurement space or the hiring space.
Indeed.
All right, John, take it away, and then I can do a quick wrap.
Christina really stole my final thunder construct, so it shows how much we're aligned. I think two things. I think let's do the right thing, not necessarily the easy thing, right? Like, how many times in life do you come across something that you feel is you shy away from it because it feels too hard, right? Like let's lean into the hard things here. And then the second thing is like, and everybody has to do that. So I don't care what I'm once again, real talk. I don't care what your role is. If you're listening to this, if you hear me, I don't care what your role is. You have a responsibility into this process, whether it is to illuminate a gap, whether it is you have the authority to change something. But at the end of the day, everybody has to lean into this. Everybody has to lead in some way, or this will never get any better, right? So yes, we can experiment, but everybody's got to be a part of that experimentation.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. This has been an absolute awesome conversation. I think there's a lot of questions beyond that. We do have I think it's a LinkedIn page and also a site within the DevOps Institute. Please join the conversation. This is just getting rolling now, and hopefully there's a lot of great things to come. We can start understanding these challenges and making some progress on them, over the course of the next few years. So thank you very much, and see you next time.